This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Emerging market shares rebounded today after 4 sessions of losses. They were boosted by hopes of a resolution of trade tensions between China and the US. Now, on the continent, Nigeria's NSE up just over 2% on the day. Nestle and Seplat both rising about 6%. Of course, traders are now saying that investors have tentatively started to pick up shares to position for a post-election rally. So far this week, stocks are trading at a near 2-month high in Nigeria. Now, also coming up on the show, Tanzania's foreign exchange reserves shrink by $439 million. The U.S. government reaches an agreement in principle to fund Trump's border wall. And Uganda has found a way to save millions of coffee trees from the wilt disease. Let's start off the show in Tanzania. The country's foreign exchange reserves recorded a decline of about $439.3 million in the first half of the 2018 and 2019 fiscal year. Now, the slight fall is primarily a result of foreign debt servicing in the country, as well as large infrastructure projects. Now, according to a report by the Bank of Tanzania, the nation's gross official reserves were at about $5 billion at the end of December last year. That's down from about $5.5 billion in June the same year. Well, let's get some more insight into these numbers. Daniel Kijo now joins us in Dar es Salaam. Daniel, welcome to the show. Now, despite this news, Daniel, that we're hearing FX reserves shrinking by over $400 million in the first half of the year, most economists still feel that Tanzania's debt burden is still manageable. So do analysts, Daniel, feel that there is any reason to worry following this news?
Hello, Uche. Firstly, it is important to note that when it comes to import cover, the lowest safe limit is 4 months. And as it stands, Tanzania has cover of up to 4.9 months. So it is a buffer to allow the country to execute any improvement plan should it reach the red zone. Now, this import cover is not a static number and it can change. It depends primarily on 2 parameters. One, like how much you pay in Forex, and another is how much you get paid in Forex. Now, if you look at this trend of the cover declining, yes, it's been declining, and at some point it could reach the red zone. Some analysts feel it's always good to have more import covers, while others say, you know, we are not at a dangerous place yet. It now will require, when you reach the red zone, for the government to intervene, like maybe perhaps writing to banks to know their the Forex commitment so that the central bank can manage cash flows. And in Tanzania's case, perhaps to be able to sell exports like our cashew nuts, so that if there will be an inflow of Forex into the basket, and then this will help bring stability for a period of time.
Now, of course, Daniel, the stability of reserves going forward also relies on the stability of Tanzania's currency, the shilling. In the last 2 months, we've seen the shilling slightly volatile. It's actually depreciated slightly against the dollar. So do analysts expect this trend of volatility to continue going into the year?
Uche, analysts say that in the past we have seen this similar trend of the shilling not getting weaker against the dollar. Towards 2017, the dollar had reached 2,400 shillings plus. Now, the trend now can go on, but it is in the interest of the central bank to intervene should it feel the shilling is in a dangerous place, like perhaps increase the supply of dollar into the economy so that the demand for the dollar could go down. Analysts say that if you match the demand and supply for the dollar, the price would not shoot up and would not affect the shillings negatively. We know recently 5 banks were banned from dealing in dollars, because it was part of the bank's way to manage banks that it felt were doing business in a way that was causing the exchange rates to go up. So we also know in the recent months that there were crackdown on foreign exchanges in the Arusha regions because there were some black market trading of the dollar, which was severely affecting the shilling. So the bank will keep adjusting the supply and demand of the dollar in the economy to ensure that the shilling can survive.
Well, another reason, Daniel, for this shrinking we've seen in foreign exchange reserves is a fall in traditional exports from the fiscal year ending December 2017 to December 2018. They went down from about $1 billion to $700 million. That's due, of course, to the drop of prices in tea, as well as delays in the exports of cash crops like cashew nuts. Is there a concern that export industries in the country will continue this trend going forward?
Uche, some of these crops are seasonal. Looking at the cashew nut situation that you talked about, it's severely affected the forex exchange balance in the country. There's already a hole in the economy because we've not been selling the cashew nut because of the government moves to control and decide to sell itself. So if this will continue for a few months, it will need to be this hole created by cashew nut, for instance, will need to be replaced by another export, another product. We've been hearing now that there are buyers who want to buy the cashew nuts. So if this happens, it will reverse a hole that exists now. Now, once these cashew nuts are sold, and perhaps other products like tea that you said, when there are low periods when there are no products or seasons where there are not a lot of export of these products, you can use the peaks from initial high sales like cashew nuts now, if that happens, to absorb the low sales season. So it's going to be a game of balancing, being able to sell your products to the international market, get forex, and then use that to absorb the drought seasons.
Well, we have to leave it there, Daniel. Many thanks for your insights there. Daniel Kijo joining us there in Dar es Salaam. Well, let's move on now. The Competition Tribunal in South Africa is expected to make a ruling on a list of local and international banks who are being investigated for currency manipulation. The Competition Commission began investigating improper conduct and alleged collusion of currency trades, including that of the South African rand, between a host of banks. Now, the apparent collusion dates as far back as 2007. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with more on that.
Standard Chartered has been operating for 150 years in 60 countries across the globe. It has a significant presence in Africa, but it has yet to answer for currency trading transgressions in South Africa.
It doesn't come as a surprise in the sense that we know the facts, we know exactly what happened. We have given evidence in terms of our allegations, so we've given to all the banks. What is surprising, however, is the fact that they have not pleaded to the merits in South Africa. They've asked for further information.
The Competition Commission has referred over 20 banks, including HSBC, Investec, Standard Bank and ABSA, to the tribunal in 2017. Forex traders allegedly colluded through chat rooms to fix the rand price against the US dollar from 2007.
Citibank is the only financial institution to have admitted wrongdoing thus far. It's agreed to pay a fine of $5 million. Some of the other banks are still tied up in litigation with the Competition Tribunal.
This kind of activity is very sensitive, and they knew once it gets out they will be in big trouble. So unfortunately it went out. We have those recordings, we have those chats in those rooms, so we're able to put before any presiding officer our case.
Depending on the outcome of the investigation, the Reserve Bank may have to step in.
In South Africa, you can only effect FX trades if you are an authorized dealer. So those dealers will report to the SARB and they'll be reviewed by the SARB. If they're found in breach of the SARB regulations, they can at least get fined, but I would guess if the crime is great enough, possibly lose their license.
The rand is one of the most risk-averse currencies in the world. Its performance is closely linked to the US dollar. Interference in open market trade impacts on inflation and the economy.
In South Africa specifically, if they're manipulating the price of the currency, you're manipulating transactions financial transactions, importers and exporters, how they're buying and selling their goods. Ultimately, the end user is the consumer who's buying goods, and their pensions, etc., are referenced off specific rates.
The Competition Tribunal is expected to make a ruling in the next few months. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And now let's take a look at our corporate headlines today. South Africa's state-owned oil company, Petro SA, is in talks with the nation's struggling power firm, Eskom, to supply it with diesel. Now, this is meant to prevent further electricity cuts across the country. Eskom currently has a combined debt of more than $29 billion and is seen as the single biggest risk to South Africa's economy. And the former South African Revenue Service Commissioner, Tom Moyane's attempt to get his job back has been rejected by the country's constitutional court. Moyane had approached the Apex Court directly after the High Court ruled in December that his dismissal was both lawful and rational. Well, last week, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa appointed a panel to interview and shortlist candidates for the post. Meanwhile, the managing director of Jumia's Hotel and Flight Services has urged the federal government of Nigeria to grant tax breaks to businesses in the hospitality industry. This, of course, is with the assumption that the sector will contribute more than it's currently doing to Nigeria's GDP as well as the economy if granted tax deductions. The federal government had released a list of about 27 companies to enjoy the government's tax breaks under pioneer status in 2017, and the hospitality sector didn't make the cut. And finally, Nissan Motors has unveiled that it has booked around $84 million in charges linked to the underreported compensation of a former ousted chairman, Carlos Ghosn. Now, the Japanese automaker has also slashed its annual profits outlook due to the persistent weakness in global sales. Nissan now expects its operating profit to fall to about $4.1 billion, down about 21.7% from the previous year. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a quick break now, still coming up. Businesses raise concerns about Nigeria's economy ahead of this week's presidential election. And Somalia is desperate to have its $4.6 billion debt cleared.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Nadu. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, two of the major cities I grew up in. See, business in Africa is after about a decade covering business news on the continent. I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN. Welcome back. Now let's head to Nigeria, where the government is trying to wean the economy off its reliance on oil sales by encouraging the domestic production of everything from wheat to cars. President Muhammadu Buhari's supporters point out that Nigeria rose 24 places to 145th in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business ranking in 2017. Now, the growth is largely due to government efforts to cut red tape, including issuing visas on arrival and establishing a centralized electronic system to pay federal taxes. But as the election bears down on the West African nation, the economy may be the deciding factor for many.
6 years ago, Timi Soleil returned home to Nigeria from the United States to set up a gas logistics business. 3 years later, Nigeria plunged into its first recession in a generation, following a sharp fall in the price of oil, which accounts for 90% of its foreign exchange earnings. Infrastructure projects on which Soleil's business relied on were shelved. He kept afloat by doing consultancy work, but others weren't so lucky. The 31-year-old Harvard graduate and president of Cryo Gas and Power didn't bother to vote in 2015, but this year he says he has a reason to. You
have violence and instability. You have essentially a complete halt in economic growth. The next president has quite a job on his hands, even if it's the same one. And if it's the same one, we're going to need to see almost essentially a revolution in attitude.
President Buhari's critics accuse him of failing on a number of issues, including promises to tackle corruption and defeat an Islamist insurgency that has killed thousands of people since he took office. However, Buhari's handling of the economy could cost him more votes than any other issue.
The crisis of this country and of this government in particular has been in their quest for what they call affordability. They have essentially price regulated a huge bevy of things, and they do not see that ironically it makes things more expensive.
Although Nigeria returned to growth in 2017, the economy expanded by 1.9% in 2018, compared with 5.5% when Soleil returned to Nigeria in 2013. Inflation has been in double digits for the last 3 years, rising to a 7-month high of 11.4% in December. And nearly a quarter of the workforce, which is 23.1%, is unemployed, up from 18.1% a year earlier.
Just the purchasing power from the public, like I said earlier, is lower. So it affects my own business because I don't push out the money I used to do. So at the end of the day, my sales will be lower than what I expected. So it will also affect my own purchasing from the company.
Buhari's main rival, businessman and former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, has zeroed in on the issue. Get Nigeria working again is his campaign slogan. He has vowed to double the size of the economy to $900 billion by the year 2025, mainly by giving a larger role to the private sector. Buhari argues that the way to bigger growth is through infrastructural development, touting railway and road construction. How voters respond may depend on who they believe they will be better off economically with. Alexandria Mashala for CGTN.
Now, in Somalia, regional actors have joined the country in its bid to have its debt cleared. Mogadishu now wants international lenders to write off about $4.6 billion owed by international creditors and world countries in a bid to revive the country's economy. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello reports.
The calls were made on the sidelines of the 32nd High-Level African Union Summit in Ethiopia. Government officials and some of the country's international partners met with the African Union Commission to lobby the continental body to add its voice to Somalia's call for debt cancellation. The government is optimistic that international creditors will cancel close to $5 billion that accumulated as a result of decades of conflict that also weakened Somalia's economy.
International financial regulators and lenders want us to increase our revenues and guarantee that the country will not fall again into financial turmoil. As a government, we must show a strong and solid financial progress as a precondition for debt clearance.
Mogadishu says it has introduced financial reforms in recent years, including a modern taxation system. Tax collection last year increased by up to $30 million, with the first quarter revenues highest recorded in decades. Improvements that has won praise from the World Bank.
We, as the World Bank, are able to support the government of Somalia to build on the progress that has been made in both raising revenues in an efficient way for the economy and for government, as well as ensuring that the systems are in place to utilize and monitor the expenditures of government. And these are key foundational elements for any government.
And for the first time in decades, international money lending institutions provided direct funding to Somalia, with the European Union and World Bank providing up to $250 million. The latest donor support also saw an improvement in the country's national budget that rose to $340 million, up from $270 million last year. The latest fund is expected to lead rebuilding efforts of vital infrastructure destroyed by decades of conflict. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Now, Egypt is targeting Libya as one of its main partners in the construction sector. The trade and industrial chambers from both nations have signed a protocol to use Egyptian construction material in Libyan projects, which are scheduled to start this April. Now, Cairo is targeting exports of around $15 billion of construction material to Libya in the coming year. Here's Adel El Marhoui with more.
The Egyptian-Libyan Chamber for Commerce has signed a protocol with the Egyptian Chamber of Construction Material, making Egypt a vital partner in Libya's reconstruction. Libya is rebuilding its infrastructure, and that's a lucrative opportunity for the world of business. It will begin with oil and natural gas pipelines to resume its exportation and the country's main source of revenues. Businessmen here believe Egypt has a strategic advantage.
4 countries around Egypt have gone through great wars that have destroyed its infrastructure, that is Iraq, Syria, Yemen and Libya. Egypt is a leading industrial nation in the region. So by nature, our construction materials is a top contender to serve these nations, including Libya. These materials have immense weight. Therefore, Egypt has a competitive edge other than the other nations further away, because transportation costs is immense.
Egyptian companies are eyeing some 15% of the $100 billion worth of projects planned until the year 2020. A joint committee between the two countries is currently investigating the details. The capacity of dedicated production lines for Libyan projects and security in Libya are both under questioning.
There's a great preference for Egyptian products and workers in Libya due to the proximity between the two countries. Nowadays, Libya needs around 3 million Egyptian laborers. If it were not for the fear over their safety, security authorities would have opened the door for free travel to Libya, to work in the markets there. Socially, we are like one nation divided between two countries.
The protocol is expected to be in effect starting April. However, security inspections will proceed to clear all safety issues that have been delaying Egypt's business expansions in Libya.
If implemented successfully, this protocol could be a groundbreaking achievement in the tied-up economic relations between Egypt and Libya. It could open a great window, not just for construction material, but for developers, labor, and a wider selection of Egyptian industries. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And in South Africa, a deepening crisis at the country's biggest money manager, the Public Investment Corporation, is now threatening to cast a shadow over the nation's economy. Now, the state-owned entity remains in limbo without a board after some of its members were named during a commission of inquiry for their alleged involvement in corrupt dealings. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu reporting.
While this has never happened before, the resignations were largely welcomed after it emerged that some board members were involved in impropriety and dodgy investments.
So the PIC and the government employee pension funds are two separate entities. One is a pension fund that collects and pays pensioners when they retire. And then with an asset manager, which is a separate company that invests on behalf of the pension fund.
The company at the center of the controversy is AO Technology, owned by former BRICS Business Council Chair Iqbal Survey. The PIC dubiously invested over $290 million in the company when it listed on the JSE in 2017. The share price was apparently grossly inflated. The PIC's investment came from the government employees' pension fund, which has angered public workers.
What we are saying, and we've said it to the previous ministers, GPF is not government money. That is private money. His role as a minister is to make sure that GPF and PIC is constituted with the right caliber of individuals who are not tainted, who are not politically connected, people who are there to make sure that we see value out of those particular institutions.
Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has initiated a process to appoint a new board at the PIC, but he's also being pushed into a corner because his Deputy Finance Minister, Mondli Gugubele, who is also the chair of the PIC board, has been named for his alleged involvement in these dubious dealings.
So the biggest risk for the PIC is the political interference that then undermines the governance of a director always acting in the interest of the company, not anyone. So in the case where you have been deployed, your mandate sometimes becomes very waving.
The reputation of the PIC may take time to repair. Big business looking for funding may also have to wait.
Edcon is one of the biggest reg companies. They've got stores across the land in smaller towns and they employ thousands of people, and they need financial support. And they were hoping that the PIC will come in. So decisions like those aren't going to be done, meaning that companies such as Edcon and many others that may require support, those decisions might be postponed. This is going to hurt the economy big time.
The current board will vacate once the finance minister has appointed a new board. Smita Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, private investors in Africa's healthcare systems have held a meeting in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. They're discussing cooperation in improving the healthcare sector. Now, they recognize the continent has an estimated health financing gap of about $66 billion. They're now seeking partnerships with their national governments. The meeting is the first of its kind and has been organized by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and the Aliko Dangote Foundation. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi tells us more from Addis Ababa.
Didier Drogba is an icon of international football and one of Chelsea's best-loved former players. But today, he sits among other investors to discuss how the private sector can assist governments to provide universal health care for Africans. The UN is trying to highlight where the gaps are.
Today on the continent, we import $17.3 billion worth of drugs from outside the continent. $17.3 billion worth of drugs will create about 16 million jobs on our continent if we were to produce them on the continent.
If you look at the levels of the fertility rates on the continent, it shows that there is need of proper maternal care, and therefore it's important that the health services that are provided to mothers, to children, to girls are so critical, and they need to be available, affordable and accessible.
UNAIDS has highlighted how engagement of private sector is helping tackle HIV/AIDS on the continent, but says there is room for increased support.
When I joined UNAIDS, and I want to share that, we were giving 18 pills a day to a sick person. We would have never, I said, reached 22 million people on treatment if we were not working with private sector to change completely the dynamic and to make sure that today we will be giving them only one pill a day. And soon it will be one injection every 4 months.
For the investors, there is a financial incentive. Business opportunities opportunities in healthcare in Africa are estimated to be worth $259 billion by 2030. But some in the private sector remain skeptical.
We have separate data around infrastructure. We have separate data around medical personnel. We have data on another side on vulnerabilities, etc. How do you bring all of that together actually to speak to each other?
Philanthropists across the continent are being called to come on board and support this health initiative.
The private sector is also being encouraged to build upon the Continental Free Trade Area that is expected to be operationalized soon in order to promote intra-Africa trade. Experts say that this will enable them identify market opportunities and invest in countries or build manufacturing hubs within the continent. Colette Johi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break. Still to come. The U.S. government reaches an agreement in principle to fund Trump's border wall. The first batch of humanitarian aid makes its way into Venezuela.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest minds in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Well, let's head to the U.S. now, where Democrats and Republicans have reached an agreement in principle to fund President Donald Trump's border wall with Mexico. Now, the agreement, which includes $1,375 billion in funding, is only a fraction of the money Trump's request for his promised border wall and does not mention a concrete barrier. While the deal still needs to be approved by Congress and signed by the president. Let's get the latest on that deal. We're joined by Giles Gibson in Washington. Welcome to the show, Giles. Now, as we just heard there, the Democrats, Republicans, they've reached an agreement in principle. It only contains a fraction of the money President Trump wants. Trump says he's not happy with the deal, but he also says a shutdown is unlikely. What's the latest, Giles?
Well, if you analyse the raw data here, the figures that have been agreed, it's very hard not to see this deal as a potential climb down for the Trump administration and for the White House. As you were saying, it includes $1.375 billion worth of funding. That really pales into comparison compared to the $5.7 billion that President Trump was originally requesting for his border wall project. That 1.375 billion will go towards 55 miles of what's known as bollard fencing. That compares to a 200-mile steel and concrete wall that President Trump has been talking about for months and months, both as a candidate and now as President of the United States. There is also a compromise on an issue that was really holding up these negotiations on the numbers of beds that would be provided at immigration detention centers here in the United States. That number will be capped at around 40,000. So just looking at the raw numbers here, if President Trump does sign this legislation into law, then it would be certainly a climb down, really a shortfall from what he's been looking to get hold of for weeks and weeks now.
Now, of course, Trump is still insisting that his wall will be financed. What are the chances we'll see him willing to break with the deal he promised his base and sign this deal on his return from the campaign trail?
Well, just in the last hour or so, Donald Trump's cabinet has been meeting at the White House, and President Trump was asked about what he thinks about, what he feels about this deal that's been put down on the table by this bipartisan negotiation group. He said, I can't say I'm happy about it, although he wouldn't say either way whether he's prepared to sign it or whether he's preparing to veto it if it passes through the US Congress. Certainly over the next few days, as that legislation starts to make its way through the US Congress, it's expected to pass without too many problems. Donald Trump is going to be under increasing pressure from some of these more conservative right-wing media outlets here in the United States. Overnight, Sean Hannity, who's a very high-profile host on the Fox News channel, he describes this deal that's been put on the table by Democrats and Republicans as a garbage compromise. So that's the sort of pressure that President Trump is going to be facing as he decides whether he will sign this deal or not, assuming it passes through the US Congress.
Quite right, because as we speak, there are some reports that some of Trump's conservative allies in the House have begun to mobilize against the deal. Now, looking at the options on the table, Giles, we know each side don't want to be responsible for another government shutdown. Does Trump really have that option of declaring a national emergency in order to reprogram funds towards building that wall?
Well, that national emergency option was seen by many as a way out of this. It would allow Donald Trump not to have to make a deal in the US Congress, and he could try and get on with actually building his border wall. Of course, we have to remember that if he was to go down that route, then it would almost certainly face just an avalanche of legal challenges from the Democrats and other organizations here in the United States, and that option could very quickly close as those challenges make their way through the courts. As you say, there's a lot of consternation in the more conservative, the more right-wing part of the Republican Party up on Capitol Hill here in Washington. For example, Mark Meadows, he's head of the House Freedom Caucus. He called this deal, he said it's not a serious attempt at securing our border, and he said it falls very short of where we need to be. The moment the signs are that this deal will pass through the US Congress and that President Trump will sign it, avoiding another shutdown. But of course, in the past, we have seen the White House making noises about signing legislation and then suddenly doing a 180 and pulling the rug out from underneath Republicans in Congress. So until this deal is actually signed at the Donald Trump's desk in the Oval Office, we will not be entirely sure that we're going to be avoiding yet another shutdown. The deadline for funding here in Washington, the current funding expires local time midnight on Friday this week.
Right. Well, we'll certainly keep watching to see what happens. Many thanks, Giles, for that update. Giles Gibson joining us there in Washington. Now, staying in the U.S., President Donald Trump has signed an executive order launching an initiative to ensure that the country becomes a leader in artificial intelligence. CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King has more.
When it comes to AI, the US may be playing catch-up. The US government is asking its agencies, academia and industry to make it a priority. In part, the executive order reads, the United States must drive technological breakthroughs in AI across the federal government, industry and academia in order to promote scientific discovery, economic competitiveness and national security. The US President aims to boost research, investment in AI and develop the workforce to run the machine learning technologies that will power self-driving cars, automated manufacturing and design, and the thousands of industries yet to be developed. Critics say the problem with this plan is that it's vague and has no new money behind it. In contrast, China is already deploying AI technologies for all the world to see. This year's TV extravaganza to celebrate the Spring Festival used AI and augmented reality in ways US TV networks can only dream of. AI hotels, machine learning robot waiters, even AI-inspired newsreaders are all high-profile projects that reflect a national investment priority for China.
The first is to strengthen the new type of infrastructure construction, stimulate the building of the artificial intelligence industry, industrial internet and Internet of Things, and accelerate the pace of commercial application of 5G.
The US, with its technological superiority, is still considered a leader in the AI field, but the US government fears China is catching up fast, and that propelled Trump's announcement. Without naming any individual countries, the executive order says the US must, quote, organize the development of an action plan to protect the United States' advantage in AI and AI technology, critical to the United States' economic and national security interests against strategic competitors and adversarial nations. Healthy competition between the US and China when it comes to the technologies of tomorrow could help spur global innovation. But increasingly, a sort of silicon curtain is descending between the two economies, which is forcing other nations to pick a side when it comes to the technologies of tomorrow. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
Well, let's head to Venezuela now, where opposition leader Juan Guaido says his team has delivered the first cargo of humanitarian aid. Now, he did not specify how the aid was received or from whom it came. President Nicolas Maduro has been refusing to allow the aid to come in the interest of border defense. The United Nations has warned against using humanitarian aid for political goals. Well, CGTN's Toby Muse has more from the Colombian border city of Cucuta.
Who are we? Doctors. What do we want? Humanitarian aid. That's the chant of these Venezuelan doctors. These doctors say that each day the Venezuelan government refuses to allow in food and medical supplies. It's another day that risks the lives of those in desperate need. The aid sits just 300 meters behind them, stuck in a warehouse on the Colombia-Venezuela border. The doctors are protesting the Venezuelan government's decision to block the 50 tons of aid from crossing over a bridge.
The situation is grave, where people are dying for lack of medicine, lack of treatment, lack of doctor teams to fulfill their jobs. Unfortunately, we're not providing a health service in Venezuela. We're helping our patients die in the best way.
The Venezuelan opposition is demanding the US-donated supplies be allowed in. While some have promised to march peacefully, others have said a direct challenge to the government may come days or weeks from now.
The aid itself will feed around 5,000 people for 10 days. That makes this fight mostly symbolic, between two men who claim to be the real president of Venezuela. In Caracas, President Nicolas Maduro, and self-appointed interim president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido.
Here at the Simón Bolívar Bridge that connects Venezuela and Colombia, thousands of Venezuelans cross back and forth every day. He's offering to buy human hair from Venezuelan women. Janet Monsalve sells what Venezuelans can't find back home. Diapers, also called nappies, food, and today aspirin and ibuprofen.
There's nothing in Venezuela. The people come here to eat, to buy food, to buy nappies, to buy soap.
She asks that Venezuela's president change his mind and allow the aid into the country which is coping with hyperinflation and food shortages.
This man should take pity and don't play with the lives of our children, old people, and the sick.
The protests this week may tell us what happens next. Will Maduro blink and allow the supplies through? Or has the opposition overpromised its power to effect change in Venezuela? Toby Muse, CGTN, Colombia-Venezuela border.
Now, the annual Spring Festival travel rush doesn't just mean going home for China's ever-growing number of pet owners. But what does one do with his furry little friends while going on vacation? Well, it turns out booking holiday space for pets can be just a big job as buying tickets. Well, CGTN's Francis Kuo tells us a little bit more.
Lynn has had his corgi Frenchie for half a year. He says Frenchie cost him 600 to 700 yuan, or around $100 per month on average, for food and routine grooming. And that cost went up even more during the Spring Festival holiday, when he had to leave Frenchie behind for at least 2 weeks. Finding a room for him wasn't easy and not cheap.
That will cost 140 yuan per day, or $20, and we need to provide the food and toys and cover any extra costs if he gets sick.
A China pet industry white paper says the pet market was worth 170 billion yuan, or $25 billion in 2018. That's an increase of 27% from a year earlier. So it was hardly a surprise that holiday pet hotels were in big demand. Ho Lili has been in the business for 5 years and says there are mainly 3 ways to take care of pets when the owners are away: sending them to pet care shops, to friends, or booking visiting services. Most people go with the first 2, given that visiting services are still new to the market here. Ho says the demand for pet care has grown so much that she's opening a new shop for around 30 pets every Spring Festival. And she says pet owners are now more willing to spend a good deal of money on their little friends.
This shop has been open for 2 years, and so far we're doing all right. Our main cost is pet food, particularly foreign food, which is more expensive than domestic. But we profit from providing services like pet baths.
Ho says that with the flourishing pet market, she's considering adding other types of services: studio portraits, specialized medical care, and pet insurance. She's far from the only one considering an expansion of her business. According to Pintu, a business commentary portal, there are now between 60 and 80,000 pet shops nationwide. Most of them are looking for cooperative deals with veterinarians, insurance companies, and other specialized service providers. Francis Ko, CGTN.
Well, let's shift focus now and take a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices rising today, Brent crude climbing almost 3%. Of course, they were supported by OPEC-led production cuts as well as U.S. sanctions against Iran and Venezuela, though they do remain wary of surging U.S. output and, of course, the outcome of those U.S.-China trade talks. Meanwhile, gold prices also on the up and up today. Today's slight pause in the dollar's rally as, of course, the U.S.-China continue those talks. Let's head into a quick break now. Here's what we have coming up. Uganda has found a way to save millions of coffee trees from the wilt disease. South Africa celebrates women and girls in science.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Canada, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Now, researchers in Uganda have introduced a coffee variety that is resistant to the wilt disease. The disease is a fungal infection that has wiped out millions of coffee trees in the central and western Ugandan regions. Now, this has resulted in a decline in coffee production in the country, and CGTN's Michael Baleke tells us more.
More than 800 million coffee seedlings of the new elite variety have been dispatched to farmers, according to the Ministry of Agriculture. Government says they will gradually replace all the coffee trees in the Robusta growing areas.
We are going to emphasize usage of fertilizers, both organic and inorganic, but also tending the tree by providing water to that tree during the dry spells.
Figures from the Coffee Development Agency show that Uganda produces more than 6 million bags of coffee annually, and at maturity, researchers predict the new wilt-resistant elite variety will triple that output. However, they are pressing farmers to adopt strategies that give individual coffee trees maximum productivity.
Many farmers are not attending to the coffee. The good agricultural practices are not well attended to. So we think that now rechanneling the effort into the guiding farmers to do good agronomic practices, considering the coffee, every coffee counts.
Uganda is one of the world's major coffee producers, but the coffee wilt disease has reduced hopes for the country's ambitious annual production target of 20 million bags by 2020. Unlike other major coffee diseases such as the leaf rust and the berry disease, the coffee wilt kills the entire tree, and the new resistant line is good news for close to 2 million Ugandan households involved in coffee production, given its potential in lifting many out of poverty. Mike Kobaleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, South Africa's Science and Technology Ministry has hosted female learners at the Saibono Discovery Center in Johannesburg, and that was in order to mark the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela was there for us and filed this report.
The purpose of the day is to raise awareness of the low levels of female participation in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, otherwise known as STEM. Globally, only 30% of female students pursue careers in STEM. It is hoped that this initiative by UNESCO will change that and enable girls and women to have access to quality education. South Africa's Science and Technology Ministry hosted female learners to mark the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, to also encourage female learners to fully embrace science and technology as the future for them and not only their male counterparts.
You know that traditionally, historically, women have not always had the same opportunities that their male counterparts have had. So we have put in place these kind of interventions and many others like them, so that the girl child gets proper attention and recognize themselves as just as gifted as the male counterpart.
This event was hosted by Johannesburg's Bono Discovery Center. Bono is a world-class science center that supports maths, science, and technology education. It also offers innovative, dynamic learning experiences that contribute to building South Africa's science, engineering, and technology capacity.
We envision a South African society, okay, that has got all its citizens that have acquired science knowledge, skills, and attitudes. But not only that, all South Africans can use that acquired science knowledge, skills, and attitude to produce new products and services. To do what? To improve the quality of life of all South Africans, but also create an opportunity for those people to compete in the global world of science and technology.
Science and Technology Minister Mamoluko Kubayi-Ngubane emphasized that her department is determined to ensure that girls and young women are integrated in science and technology-related programs and projects.
As we work as the Department of Science and Technology to ensure that our national system of innovation, meaning what we do within science and technology, is inclusive, meaning that we want to make sure that we don't become a science and technology of the past where women and girls were excluded, but we bring new. That's also part of the theme of UNESCO, where it talks about inclusive growth. Inclusive growth is about ensuring that all of you are able to play a role.
UNESCO reports that a combination of factors reduces the proportion of women at each stage of a scientific career. The organization is determined to change this scenario. Gilson Jamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand on steady ground following a sharp sell-off in the previous session. That, of course, was triggered by a sudden escalation of countrywide power cuts. Meanwhile, Kenya shilling gaining ground today. It was helped by inflows from offshore investors who, of course, are buying government debt and remittances. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.